They say funerals are meant to bring families together, but mine tore everything apart. On the day I buried my only son, I expected tears, condolences, and silence filled with grief. Instead, I was met with betrayal sharper than any knife. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had opened my heart and home to, stood at the door with fire in her eyes and venom in her words. "Get out," she spat, shoving a suitcase into my hands as if I were nothing more than an unwanted guest. And before I could breathe, she stole my ATM cards, stripped me of my last security, and slammed the door in my face. I stood there, numb, humiliated, my world collapsing piece by piece. She thought she had won. She thought she had buried me along with my son. But what she didn't know was that my son had taken a secret to his grave, a secret that would come back to life like a storm waiting on the horizon. He had another wife, and when that truth surfaced, it would set off a chain of events so shocking, so ruthless, that none of us could have imagined where it would lead. The funeral was the end of one story, but the beginning of a far more dangerous one. The day of my son's funeral was supposed to be about grief, about laying him to rest with dignity. Instead, it became the day I lost everything. As the mourners drifted away and the last handful of dirt fell on the coffin, I thought I would return to the house I had shared with him for years. It was the only place where his memory lingered, the scent of his books, the sound of his laughter echoing in the hallway. But when I reached the doorstep, it wasn't solace waiting for me. It was her. My daughter-in-law stood tall at the door, her face hardened with a coldness I had never seen before. Without a word of comfort, she shoved a small suitcase into my arms. "You don't belong here anymore," she hissed. "This is my house now. Go live off your memories somewhere else." Confused and still trembling from the weight of grief, I tried to protest, but before I could, she snatched the wallet from my purse. All my ATM cards, gone in an instant. "You'll manage," she sneered. "After all, you're good at surviving on scraps." Then she slammed the door in my face. Standing there on the porch, my chest tightened, not just from sorrow, but from betrayal. She thought she had won. She thought she had stripped me of every last thread of security. But fate has a cruel way of unraveling arrogance. Because only days later, she would discover a truth far darker, far more shocking than anything she had imagined. My son, the man she thought belonged solely to her, had kept a secret, one that would soon crack her world open like glass under a hammer. He had another wife. And with that revelation, the game of revenge, betrayal, and justice was only beginning. 3 days after my son's funeral, I received a knock on the door of the small rented room I had managed to find with the little cash I still had. I thought it might be a kind neighbor bringing food, or perhaps one of my late son's friends offering condolences. But when I opened the door, I froze. A woman stood before me, tall, graceful, with eyes that carried the same grief I bore. She wore black, her veil slightly tilted back, and in her hands she held a framed photograph of my son. I'm sorry to disturb you," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But you don't know me. My name is Claire, and I was your son's wife." The room spun. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What did you just say?" She stepped inside, placing the photo gently on my table. There he was, my son, smiling beside her in a wedding suit, his arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The date on the frame was 2 years ago. 2 years. Long before his first marriage ever happened. "I didn't come to fight," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I came because I need to know, did he tell you about me?" My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. No, he hadn't told me. He had kept this secret even from his own mother. And suddenly, everything about his first marriage, the tension, the coldness in the house, the way his wife always seemed threatened by something unseen, made sense. Claire sat across from me, her hands trembling. I didn't even know he had another wife until after his death. I found out at the cemetery when I heard her name. Her eyes burned with anger now. "And if she kicked you out like you said, then I promise you this. She won't get away with it. Not after what she's done to you, and not after what she tried to take from me." For the first time since my son's death, I felt something stronger than grief stirring in my chest. Hope. Because I was no longer alone. The daughter-in-law thought she had won, but she had no idea what storm was coming. Claire, and I didn't waste time. Two grieving women, one mother, one widow, were bound now by a single purpose: truth. The very next morning, Claire insisted we go together to the house where my daughter-in-law still lived, the house that had once been filled with my son's laughter. I was hesitant. The thought of seeing that woman again made my stomach twist. But Claire's determination was unshakable. "She needs to know she's not the only one," she said firmly, her jaw set. When we arrived, the daughter-in-law opened the door with her usual air of arrogance. Her eyes narrowed the second she saw me. "Didn't I tell you never to come back here?" she snapped. But before she could slam the door, Claire stepped forward, her hand firmly on the frame, blocking it. "You don't even know who I am," Claire said calmly, though her voice carried steel. The daughter-in-law sneered. "And why should I care?" "Because," Claire said, pulling out the framed photograph from her bag and holding it up, "I was his wife before you ever were." The air turned to ice. For a moment, the daughter-in-law's face went pale, then flushed deep red. She grabbed the photo, her hands shaking, staring at it as if it might burst into flames. This is fake," she stammered. "You're lying." Claire didn't flinch. She reached into her folder and pulled out official documents, the marriage certificate, signed and sealed. "Does this look like a lie?" I watched as the woman who had thrown me out, who had robbed me of my last security, began to crumble. Her lips trembled, her breath quickened. No, he couldn't have done this to me." "Oh, he did," Claire said sharply, her grief spilling into anger. "And you may have kicked his mother out like trash, but you won't erase me. This house, these accounts, you think they're all yours? You're wrong." The daughter-in-law's mask cracked completely now. Her voice rose into a scream. "Get out, both of you. This is my home." Claire's eyes locked onto hers. "Not for long." And in that moment I knew the war had officially begun. The confrontation left the daughter-in-law rattled, but Claire was far from finished. The very next day, she asked me to meet her at a lawyer's office downtown. She had already started digging into my son's financial records, bank accounts, property papers, and legal documents that he had left behind without anyone realizing the storm they would unleash. When I entered the office, Claire was seated at the table, her eyes sharp with determination. Spread out before her were stacks of papers, photocopies of accounts, and most shocking of all, a will. "I found this through his lawyer," she explained, sliding the will toward me. "He updated it just a year ago, and you won't believe who he left everything to." My heart pounded as I read the names. His savings, his investments, even the deed to the house. All of it had been split between me and Claire. The daughter-in-law's name was nowhere. "Not a penny," I gasped. "But she's been living like she owns it all. She stole my cards. She kicked me out." "That's because she doesn't know this exists," Claire said, her voice firm. "But she's about to find out." The lawyer, a calm man with silver hair, leaned forward. "Legally, your son's widow, Claire, has full rights to contest the occupation of the property. And with you listed in the will, the two of you are the rightful heirs. The other woman has no legal standing here." For the first time since my son's death, I felt the weight shift. The very house she had thrown me out of was never hers to begin with. The money she had stolen? Worthless compared to what the documents in front of us declared. Claire's lips curled into a bitter smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had crushed you. But now? We take everything back. And when we do, we'll make sure she remembers this day forever. I clenched my fists, a spark of strength igniting inside me. She had taken my dignity, my home, and my stability. But fate had given me something far more powerful, a partner in this fight, and the truth my son had hidden. The game had only just begun, but now the battlefield was ours. 2 weeks later, a storm blew through the quiet street where my son's house stood. Not a storm of weather, but of justice. Claire and I stood across the road, watching as the courier approached the front door with a thick envelope in hand. My daughter-in-law opened it, her usual smug expression frozen as the courier announced, "Legal notice. You've been served." She tore the envelope open on the spot, her eyes darting across the pages. I could see the blood drain from her face as she read the words that shattered her illusions. Eviction. Property dispute. Fraudulent possession. She stumbled backward, clutching the doorway for balance. Her voice cracked as she screamed, "No. This is my house. He promised me everything." Claire stepped forward then, her presence calm but unyielding.
"No."
"He promised me his lawful wife. And he left everything to his mother and me in his will. You were never part of it." The woman's hands shook violently as she tried to hold the papers. "This can't be true, this can't." But the lawyer's seal at the bottom was undeniable. The court had spoken. The house, the assets, even the accounts she had been draining were no longer hers. She had 2 weeks to vacate the property or face forced removal. Her rage boiled over into a shriek. "You tricked him. Both of you. You think you can steal what's mine." Claire's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "The only thief here is you. You stole his mother's money. You stole her home. But the law doesn't forget, and neither do we." I watched her crumble, clutching the notice to her chest, her confidence dissolving into panic. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. For the first time, she knew she was cornered. And as she slammed the door shut, trembling behind it, I realized something powerful. She wasn't just losing a house. She was about to lose the life she had built on lies. The war was no longer silent. It was public, legal, and irreversible. The courthouse was buzzing the morning of the hearing. Reporters lingered outside, sniffing for scandal, and curious neighbors filled the benches, eager to witness the fall of a woman who had strutted around the neighborhood as if she owned the world. Inside, Claire and I sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, our lawyer flipping through files with calm precision. Across the aisle, my daughter-in-law sat stiffly, her face pale but her eyes flashing with defiance. She had hired an expensive attorney, clearly hoping money would shield her from the truth. The judge entered, and silence swept the room. Papers rustled, hearts pounded, and then it began. The first blow came quickly. Our lawyer presented my son's will, the one that had left everything to Claire and me. The courtroom murmured as the seal and signature were verified. My daughter-in-law's face twitched, but she tried to remain composed. Then came the second blow. Bank records, every withdrawal, every transfer, showing how she had drained accounts immediately after his death. The judge's brows furrowed. Finally, the witnesses. A neighbor testified how she had seen me thrown out on the very night of the funeral, suitcase in hand, while my daughter-in-law screamed insults on the porch. Another witness, a bank clerk, described how she had rushed in days later, frantically trying to claim accounts that legally weren't hers. By the time Claire stood to speak, the room was heavy with judgment. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling but strong. "Your Honor, I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because this woman not only robbed his mother of her dignity, but she also robbed me of the life my husband wanted for us. My husband wasn't perfect, but he made his wishes clear." She spit on those wishes for her own greed. The judge's gavel struck. "I have heard enough." The verdict was swift. The property, assets, and accounts were returned to their rightful heirs, Claire and me. My daughter-in-law was ordered to vacate immediately, repay stolen funds, and face charges for fraud and financial abuse. As the words echoed through the courtroom, she collapsed into her chair, her mask shattered. The empire she had built on arrogance had crumbled to dust in a single morning. For the first time, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Justice had finally begun to speak. Losing the court battle should have ended things, but my daughter-in-law wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered gracefully. Instead of leaving the house quietly, she began plotting, her pride boiling into something far darker. One evening, as Claire and I sorted through legal documents at her apartment, I received a call from a mutual friend. His voice trembled with urgency. She's bragging, openly, that she has one last move left. She said if she goes down, she's taking you both with her. I didn't know what that meant, but a knot twisted in my stomach. And within days, the answer came crashing in. The bank called. Someone had attempted to forge Claire's signature on a withdrawal slip for a joint account my son had left behind. The clerk, suspicious, had reported it immediately. Security footage confirmed what we feared. It was her. Claire's fury was ice cold. She lost in court, so now she wants to steal in the shadows. She doesn't realize she just handed us her final mistake. We took the evidence straight to the police. When officers knocked on her door, she exploded with venom, hurling curses and denial, but the forged documents and the camera footage left no room for lies. Neighbors gathered outside as she was led away in handcuffs, thrashing and screaming. "You think you've won?" she shrieked at us, her voice breaking with rage. "You'll regret this. You'll both regret this." But her threats rang hollow. This wasn't defiance, it was desperation. She had clawed at every shadow, tried every scheme, and now the walls had finally closed in. As the police car pulled away, Claire slipped her hand into mine, her voice steady. "It's over. She's finished. And this time, there's no coming back." For the first time in months, I let myself believe it. The nightmare was ending. Justice had taken its full shape, not only through the courts, but through her own downfall. But deep inside, I knew the scars she left behind would never vanish. They would live in the silence of my son's empty chair, in the echo of his laughter that no verdict could restore. And yet there was also strength. Out of grief and betrayal, I had found an ally, a daughter not by blood, but by truth. And together, we had survived. Months passed. The storm that had ripped through my life finally began to settle, leaving behind a strange, quiet peace. The house that had once been a battlefield was now legally ours, mine and Claire's. Walking back through those doors for the first time after her eviction, I felt the ghosts of pain pressing against the walls, but also the light of justice. The rooms were empty. She had taken what she could before the police dragged her away: clothes, trinkets, and even some furniture. But what she could never take was dignity, truth, and the memory of my son. Claire and I decided to rebuild the home, not as a shrine to the past, but as a foundation for a new life. She moved in, and together we began to share the burden of grief, turning it slowly into strength. It wasn't easy. Nights were long, memories painful. But slowly, laughter crept back into the halls. Not my son's, but Claire's soft laugh when we cooked together, or my own when she shared stories of his hidden quirks I had never known. As for the daughter-in-law, her name became little more than a whisper in the town. Convicted of fraud and theft, she spent her days behind cold bars, far from the life of luxury she had flaunted. Some said she begged for pity in court. Others said she cursed our names until her voice broke. I didn't care. The law had spoken. Her reign of cruelty was finished. One spring morning, as the sun spilled through the windows, I sat at the kitchen table with Claire. She poured me tea, and for the first time, she called me Mom. Tears welled in my eyes. My son was gone, but through Claire, I hadn't lost everything. In fact, I had gained a daughter who had fought beside me, who had turned pain into power. As I looked around the house, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but of survival, I whispered to myself. She thought she had won. But in the end, love, truth, and justice always win. And with that, our new beginning truly began.